Where you can see that it is really good for business is that all the data now indicates that companies that are active and do ESG well, including CSR, tend to enjoy a premium. Their share prices tend to enjoy a premium over other companies that don't. That is a big incentive for all the stakeholders.
Both the last government and this government have identified a key priority in Sri Lanka as the social cohesion part of it, as something that has over the years been what has really prevented us from reaching our full potential as a nation.
We do a lot of evaluation, research, discussion at various levels to see how we as a corporate can contribute. If we feel that there is a justifiable, sustainable manner that is impactful in our contribution, then we take that on.
Everyone, and in the studio today, I have three eminent panelists from the John Keells Group who are here to discuss the fabulous work of the John Keells Foundation, which just celebrated its 20th anniversary. I have with me Krishan Balendra, chairperson of JKH. Welcome, Krishan.
Thank you.
Nadija Tambiah is the president of Legal, Secretarial and CSR at the John Keells Group. Welcome, Nadija.
Thank you, Imran.
And last but not least, most important person, Carmeline Jayasuriya is the head of CSR and a senior assistant vice president at John Keells Group. Welcome, Carmeline.
Thanks, Imran.
Krishan, let me start off with you. John Keells has been doing CSR for 150 years, the entire existence of their life. But you've formalized this through a foundation, and it's celebrating its 20th anniversary now. Why a dedicated CSR unit?
Yeah, as you said, Imran, we've been doing CSR for a very long time. We've been in business in Sri Lanka for more than 150 years. The foundation, the formal foundation was set up 20 years ago, 2005. But I think just after I joined, I think in 2003, the leadership at the time conceptualized the foundation to centralize the CSR work that we were doing. Prior to that, we were doing a lot. I mean, one example that a lot of people are familiar with is Kalapola,
of course,
where John Keells is the main sponsor and organizer. And with our CSR work, one thing that we were keen to do was, instead of having handouts and donations, it was to be more focused on empowering people to improve their livelihoods, and in particular in the areas in which we operate. So that was kind of broadly the thinking. And the foundation itself was to centralize what we were doing. And it has really been quite effective over the 20 years if you look at what we've done. So with the foundation, it has improved the way we mobilize funding. So the group commits annually to give a certain part of its profits to the foundation. It has helped with our interaction with stakeholders, with partners, in mobilizing our colleagues to participate in a lot of our initiatives, and also in executing our initiatives. And I think we were, if not the first, one of the first private sector companies in Sri Lanka to set up a CSR foundation. So if we look at what we have achieved over the last 20 years, certainly what we set out to do by establishing the foundation has been achieved.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that, actually. Nadija, a question to you. Foundations are a dime a dozen. But the ones that are really effective around the world are those whose aims, contribute to building up a country and align with long-term established national priorities. How does the JKH Foundation do that?
Imran, having worked at the John Keells Group for several decades now, I think practically everything that the group does is in some way nation building. But the foundation is special because whilst the group does a lot of work towards the economy, even internally in terms of how we manage our environmental footprint, how we manage things like gender diversity within our communities. What the foundation does is work with our communities. And it really acts as the outreach part of our greater ESG framework. And when we looked at how, I think Carmeline should talk really about how it was set up, but it started then by aligning itself to the Millennium Development Goals and then the country priorities. Since then, we have continuously reevaluated and refocused. One of the things that we do is we benchmark ourselves against best practices around the world.
Right.
Our current focus areas are based on national needs of the country that were identified with the UN and the government in 2023-24. And it's also very, very aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's relevant. And Krishan mentioned the fact that we have very consciously moved away from philanthropy and welfare-based activities. For us, the key to Sri Lanka's future has been about building very strong, skilled citizenry and a very healthy environment. And all our activities, we have a vision of empowering the nation for tomorrow, and all our activities are in that vein. We also follow the principles of UN Global Compact, and I think Carmeline or Krishan will talk a little bit more about how we report and engage to make it relevant. The fact that we constantly reevaluate and refocus, I think, has made a difference. And it makes a difference in terms of being relevant and in terms of the impact that we deliver. So if you look at in the last few years, we had the financial crisis. And during that time, we looked around what we can do that was not a handout. And we worked with several farmers in our communities, and we introduced good agricultural practices to them, things that would allow them to do drip irrigation, manage without the fertilizer that was missing at the time. And as a result, we now have a community of farmers around our businesses who are not only having greater yields, which at the time helped with the food crisis, but also are now growing more market-relevant crops in a very efficient manner, using a fraction of the water and fertilizer they did before. So it's moved them up the value chain, and I think all we've done is help them to help themselves. So that's what we mean. Similarly, at the same time, we recognized that there was an education gap that was caused by multiple crises that had prevented children from going to school. So we worked with the Ministry of Education, and we worked on a program called Pasal Diriya, during which we provided 700,000 meals to over 4,000 children in our communities. And that gave them a continuous access to education during these difficult times, which really was important in terms of bridging this gap. So all our activities under our vision of empowering the nation for tomorrow are really about empowering dignity, self-reliance, and a strong community.
I actually have only one word for that: refreshing. Because when I see the aims of numerous foundations, I just see it's very temporary. These seem nation building. I'll come to you. Something that Nadija said about constant revaluation, the fact that the foundation examines what are its aims on a continuous basis to make sure that they are relevant, not just for emerging crises, but for the long term as well. Can you give us some examples of how this focus has evolved over the last 20 years?
Sure, Imran. So like both Krishan and Nadija mentioned, CSR has been always there at John Keells, but it has evolved according to the country context, the times, and the needs. When we started in 2003, we really didn't have that much to go by in terms of case studies, locally or even globally, on best practices in CSR. So most of our research was based on national needs and what would really work when we apply ourselves as a corporate. Just because there's a national need doesn't mean we just jump in and do it. We do a lot of evaluation, research, discussion at various levels to see how we as a corporate and a conglomerate can contribute. if we feel that there is a justifiable, sustainable manner that is impactful in our contribution, then we take that on. So in terms of what we took on as focus areas initially, there were 6, which were primarily connected, as Nadija said, to the Millennium Development Goals, but also national needs. So we took on education, health, livelihood development, arts and culture, environment, and disaster relief. Now, why so many is a question a lot of people ask, but that's because we are a conglomerate with diversified businesses, with presence across the nation. Sometimes the needs can be very wide-ranging and different. The business capabilities, competencies, and presence can be very different. And based on this, we purposely took a very wide basket. Within those focus areas, we also identified even those early times projects such as English, IT, soft skills. Why? Because like Nadija mentioned, there is a huge education gap, sometimes more qualitative, making sure that all our children and youth have those opportunities in as equitable manner as possible to reach their dreams and aspirations. This was primarily driven not English for sake of English, but as a communication tool. How does one harness skills such as English, IT, soft skills, career skills, and, take yourself on the path that you wish to progress on. So that is one example. In terms of reevaluation, as you mentioned, Imran, it's a constant in our system. We constantly re-examine, reevaluate, introspect on our projects, on our focuses. Now, as you mentioned at the outset, it's our 20th year. These focus areas were also not set in stone. So what we did was, over time, we reevaluated our projects as well as our focus areas. Last year, we decided that taking into account the evolving landscape of the country, the needs, as well as, how John Keells itself has grown, we should reclassify our focus areas, not specifically to drop any particular projects as such, but looking at the needs of the time and making things relevant to that context. So now we have reclassified our focuses into 4. They are education, social health and cohesion, community and livelihoods, and the last one is biodiversity. Within each of those, again, there are identified medium to long-term projects that we work on, and some of those I can elaborate on as we go forward.
Great. And I see the focus now narrowing, which is, I think, I don't know, it's a good thing or a bad thing, but we will see going forward.
More than narrowing, Imran, we are becoming more focused.
Yes.
For instance, if I am to just give a quick example, we moved from health to social health and cohesion. Why? Health can a lot of the time mean physical health.
Exactly.
So we have done good projects in the past, like vision, attending to sight issues, etc. But there are a lot of players now involved in that arena. What we felt was taking on aspects that are more difficult for individuals or small organizations to take on. For instance, as Nadija mentioned, we very much on the path of nation building. One of the issues that hold us back as a people, in addition to being multilingual, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, we are also out of a long-term conflict,
of course,
30-year war. Coming out of it, there is this kind of lack of cohesiveness among our people, misunderstandings, lack of empathy. So how do we address these issues? How do we combat things that inhibit people from moving forward? Not just individually, but collectively, supporting one another, empathizing with one another. So we took on social health and cohesion, expanding it from health, going into this arena. And that is also taking on aspects which Nadija will hopefully elaborate on later, because she's very passionate about those aspects. The creative economy of the country. How do we provide great opportunities to our youth, to our women, and to everyone in developing their passions into professions and building the creative economy of the countries.
Imran, if I can just come in a little bit here, I think two things I wanted to say. One is that a lot, because we are ultimately a corporate and accountable to our shareholders, we regularly do impact assessments so that we measure, all of our projects, we measure impact and how it's making a difference. And several times we certify these from outside as well. The refocusing of our focus areas, I mentioned earlier, we benchmark. And I think both the last government and this government have identified a key priority in Sri Lanka as the social cohesion part of it, as something that has over the years been what has really prevented us from reaching our full potential as a nation. So those two quick interjections in that.
No, excellent. I think, from a personal anecdotal perspective, I think that's what we are lacking. We really are not cohesive as a country, right? Irrespective of the fact that the war has ended.
And also to think Sri Lanka,
Exactly.
Not within your individual boundaries, but think of people progressing as a nation.
And I just want to say, it's not just North and South.
Of course, it's everywhere.
It's youth, it is down South, there's a huge social gap that requires a more deliberate addressing.
Nadija, no foundation succeeds alone. It partners with its communities, it partners with various stakeholders, and then you mentioned a little bit of that earlier. I want to dig into it a bit more. How do you maintain long-standing partnerships, and how do you make sure that these partnerships deliver in pursuit of your goals?
So we have a very small internal team, 4 people, fabulous, dedicated, led by the passion and vision of Carmeline, that manage this. All we have over the 20 years had a huge, vast range of projects, both geographically and in terms of the type, whether it's education, disaster relief, etc. All our projects are carried out by our volunteers. So we ensure that our volunteers are involved and employees get the chance to volunteer. And they, I have to say, over successive chairmen, including Krishan, have been the front-facing champion of our initiatives with the GEC and the group management committee that follow it. All our projects are also led by an employee volunteer who have a passion in that subject. And the businesses that are on the ground have been key to the implementation. At one point, we used to work in areas that were not connected with our businesses because that was a national need to go out into very remote areas. But over time, we've learned that having ground presence and continuous ground engagement with our communities has been key to sustain multi-generational change. So when you work in a community and you're trying to change that community's mindset from welfare to empowerment, having presence on the ground, working with them. So we rely heavily on our hotels, our factories, our warehouses, our supermarkets, our collection centers, because they're the people who are working with the communities. And that's really made, I think, a huge amount of difference. We also work in tandem with government, both local government and central government in our initiatives, because we don't want to duplicate and we want to make sure that we do co-partner things that are focused towards government priorities as well. And finally, one of the pillars of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, is partnerships. And I think we have recognized that we make a far bigger impact and we can reach further with partnerships. So we work a lot with partners who are working on things that are aligned to our vision. So I don't want to mention any of them here, but there are a multitude of them without whom we cannot be this impact.
If I may add to that, Imran, in terms of partners, we work across the board with the public sector,
Of course.
the private sector, NGOs, INGOs, UN organization bodies, as well as grassroots organizations. Now, like Nadija mentioned, it optimizes impact, but there are also additional benefits. You avoid duplication
Of course,
or
yes.
replication, right? Then you collect resources and work collectively on an identified cause rather than different organizations working on similar things in different ways. So efficiencies, whether it's time, resource efficiency, all of that is enhanced in addition to the ultimate impact you create. So last month we had, as John Keells Foundation, a partner felicitation event, which was primarily to recognize all these stakeholders who have worked with us over the 20 years. And it was really interesting to see the wide spectrum of parties that had come together under this wider CSR banner. And I think moving forward, there's so much that organizations can do in working collectively on causes that they believe in.
Because I'm still left shocked that you have only 4 people working for the simple reason that, I've worked in so many NGOs where 40 to 50% of all their revenue simply goes for headcount. So there is very little that they do in terms of effectiveness. Both Krishan and Nadija mentioned about the bigger projects, the flagship projects that you do. Anything else that you'd like to highlight in terms of the flagship projects? From the
Yes.
foundation?
So as I already mentioned, our English scholarship program is now over 20 years. It has impacted the lives of over 21,000 children and youth. And what is great about that is, if I may just give you an example, because it's nothing like coming from the mouths of our beneficiaries. We had a young teenager called Anuradha who started in our first batch of the English program. And she did a 2-year edXA program. After that, she discovered she had a passion for English. Now, she came from a socially disadvantaged background, but she had other language skills, the Oriental languages. She discovered a passion for English. She desired to pursue that for her A-levels. She got good results, got into university, and pursued language studies. And now she's a lecturer at one of our state universities in language studies, in translation methods, etc., reading for her PhD. Now, this is a girl who started with us at 12. And now she's progressed this far. And she tells us that germination was really the English scholarship program that she got into. So that is a flagship. Soft skills for university students, making them more career ready, is another. 19 years in the making now and going strong. We had a program called Village Adoption, which, as Nadija mentioned, based on the country context at the time, went into severely impoverished areas, especially post-conflict. And we had huge diversified development initiatives over blocks of 5-10 years in those areas. If I may mention a few, Halmillava in the Anuradhapura district, a border village. Then in Mullatiu, Pudikudiripu, where the war ended, we had 2 villages, Iranapale and Pudumathalan. Then we had another village that was called Mangalagama in Ampara, Nithulemade in Kandy. So these are far-flung areas. But like Nadija said, now we have pulled back, focusing more on our business areas, because that way we can sustain initiatives and impact more. Some of our other flagships are, as I mentioned, Project Way, working on gender-based violence, child abuse prevention, substance abuse prevention, all under social cohesion. These are now 10 years and more. Again, creating a lot of impact in changing people's attitudes, concepts, discriminations, etc. Then another interesting initiative is the Rural BPO initiative, which was the first of its kind, creating little satellite BPOs in areas like Mahavilakshya, Sinigama and Jaffna, getting young people after school, after their A-levels, involved in virtual corporate level jobs, but in their own villages or areas. These units are still continuing. They provide back office services to Informate, one of our subsidiaries. And the beauty of that is they primarily engage young women, young mothers, who are able to, support family income from their own areas without coming into cities. there are lots of, I think Nadija can pipe in on some of the arts and culture related initiatives which are very, very big on the radar. And also biodiversity. We have programs like Project Leopard, Elephant Research in the past, working on critical aspects of biodiversity. Currently, we have a project called Cinnamon Rainforest Restoration Project, which works on a degraded 59-acre land close to the Singharaja rainforest, reforesting and restoring that ecosystem. Nadija, would you like to add on the creative economy aspects?
I've become spokesman for this, not because of any qualification, I think because I am passionate about it. But there's been a lot of focus from UN agencies and across the world on the creative industries. I think simply because they've become such a huge contributor to GDP in countries like Korea and the UK. You know, in Korea, they've exceeded, I think, electronics. And the fact that in Sri Lanka, we don't have a lot of focus on the creatives. Although they, around the world, have now become one of the greatest contributors to export earnings.
And it's also soft power,
It's
for
a
the
soft
country.
power. It is the greatest employer of youth and women. And when we started this journey, our deputy chairman at the time, Ajit Gurumadan, called us in and said, "What is your focus?" And he gave us a report from Credit Suisse. And he said, "Read this to understand what we need to do." And it was about initiatives that moved a developing nation into a developed nation. And it was about different things that you can do to increase productivity and so on. And one of the things is about creating our own brand, creating our own IP. That's what the tiger countries in Asia have done. And the fact that Sri Lanka is still very much a supplier rather than creating brands. The creative industries are one of those things that have the potential to get there. And over the last few years, I think we're really seeing it. The John Keells Foundation supports several initiatives that have alleviated Sri Lanka's brand in various initiatives, creative initiatives, into a global stage. The Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art is one. The John Keells Foundation.
I didn't realize John Keells was part of it. When I looked at it, I've gone to many museums around the world, right? So it is very up there in terms of presentation and quality. I didn't know it was a JKH Foundation initiative. Congratulations.
You were one of the founder benefactors of that. The George Keat Foundation, the Gratian Trust. Now we have authors reaching global stages.
My wife is a shortlistee, so I'm very aware of the work.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Yes, so all of these are really
and also
moving.
Chitrasena Vajira Dance
Chitrasena
Foundation,
they're
Sunera
all
Foundation.
on global stages. And things that I think is now benefiting that entire artistic and creative community. So something that we think requires continuous support. Yeah, things like the Mathura Festival, for example, builds connections between the youth of the Deep South and Colombo, which something that's a very social need.
And also I should add that when we say support, it is not support forever.
Of course.
Or just monetary support. It is also that kind of strategic engagement with them, building up these smaller organizations so they can think global, or they could be supported to go global. So it is not like a hand-holding exercise forever.
Yes.
It's growing them along with ourselves.
Krishan, I've let them, talk
Yes.
about a lot of the initiatives because I think very few people know about them, right? I mean,
Yes.
obviously, I bought from Kalapolis, I know about it, but
Correct.
there's a lot of the initiatives I've heard for the first time. But ultimately, JKH is a listed entity, right? With a lot more subsidiaries listed as well. And you are accountable to your shareholders. So how does the JKH Group integrate its CSR to its business strategy? And also within its ESG framework to make sure that it delivers for its shareholders as much as it delivers to the communities?
I think, while initiatives like Kalapola, the English language education project or Project Wave has an indirect impact on our businesses, what we do, the communities around where we operate helps us get a lot of goodwill. So whether it's working with the community around Echelon on batiks, whether it is, we give starter packs for home gardening, and then try to procure a lot of our fruits and vegetables from within a certain radius of our resort hotels. All that helps to win the goodwill of the communities in which we operate. So that is good for business. A lot of our colleagues come from those communities, especially in our resort hotels and our factories. They are from the neighborhood. So having that goodwill is very good for business. But you mentioned being a listed entity, and this is where there's an interesting point, because John Keells or JKH is broadly owned, and about 45% is owned by foreign institutional investors. So the typical emerging markets funds, and they look at ESG very actively, right? So there's of course environment, there's the governance side, which is critical, and the CSR side or the social side. And that's why today the annual reports have gone from what it was, which was just the financial accounts, to the integrated reports. But where you can see that it is really good for business is that all the data now indicates that companies that are active and do ESG well, including CSR, tend to enjoy a premium. Their share prices tend to enjoy a premium over other companies that don't. So that is a big incentive for all the stakeholders. So our partners are expecting us to be active in CSR, our consumers for sure are expecting, and our shareholders are actively monitoring that and rewarding the company with a premium. So it's CSR, and the foundation has been very good for business as well, apart from the philanthropic angle.
Can I just add to that? I think, one of the reasons we set up a central foundation, because the businesses do some CSR that is relevant for their business. But the central foundation and our central focus has been that ultimately JKH has been a very strong Sri Lankan company, dependent on the Sri Lankan economy to some extent, and also dependent on the Sri Lankan workforce. So having a pipeline of educated, skilled, and relevantly skilled people is extremely important for us for our continuation and our success. So a lot of our education, soft skills initiatives are looking at how do we educate our entire community so that we have a community that we work with for the future of our business. Also, as one of the largest tourism room owners in the country, one of the big lacks that we've had in the country is the lack of tourism products. So again, our initiatives, whether it is the batiks or whether it is some of the arts projects, have been about creating tourism products. So when we talk about strategic CSR, they're not completely unconnected with our businesses. They are ultimately going to benefit what our businesses also rely on.
And if I may also add, Imran, in terms of, direct relevance to the group, there are instances, for instance, now, like Krishan said, stakeholders, our shareholders look at certain things. Mm-hmm. One of them is gender parity, inclusivity, non-discrimination, how inclusive we are as a corporate and as a job creator. Now, if you take our Project Wave, it's all about eliminating these biases people have, this kind of negative influences or attitudes, breaking them down, making people more conscious, less discriminatory. What Project Wave also did, as an example, within the group is it reinforced our policy framework and our processes. It made us introspect about policies we already had, were there gaps, should they be, made more comprehensive. Our processes, grievance handling mechanisms were reviewed, wherever necessary were revamped. So there is a direct connect in certain instances, because under Project Wave, Imran, working against violence through education, our first step was to start with our own teams. we took these awareness programs across the group to all our businesses and at head office. It educated our people about the policies so that they were not just sitting in some file. It came alive in people's minds. They got to know their rights, their responsibilities, their obligations, and how this kind of interaction needs to be empathetic, non-discriminatory, inclusive. So those elements are directly relevant to the business and obviously then to our shareholders as well.
Nadija, I want to come back to you because I'm still, amazed at this 4-member staff full-time team that you have. Very, very briefly, can you tell me, how do you manage so many initiatives with such a small team?
I think the keys are volunteers, really. The way we've structured our program is worth talking about a little bit. Every business is encouraged to release their people to volunteer. So they remain paid even if they are in the field. The foundation tracks the number of hours that our volunteers work. Every year, the chairman will acknowledge how much contribution has been given. Big contributions are given an award at our annual Chairperson's Awards. We give certificates, we celebrate them, and I think anyone who's volunteered once understands the personal fulfillment. If you don't mind, I'll share a very personal story. Is my primary job as a lawyer is one of the most exciting I think you can get in this country. And it's been immensely fulfilling. And I remember 16 years ago, Carmeline dragged me out and said, come, you have to go, and you haven't volunteered for any of these things. I used to volunteer at Kalapula, but I'd never gone out. And having got out into the field and you're in this blazing hot sun, but suddenly you're speaking to women who are suddenly supporting their households because of skilled initiatives that the foundation has done. You're speaking to women who've reached university and are now doing PhDs because of education initiatives that we've done. You're talking to artists and it's incredibly humbling, incredibly personally enriching. I personally have never looked back, and I will put my hand up for the first any time. And having sat on several interview boards over the years, I think it's something that the young people in this country are really yearning for. And John Keells is known as a life, a lot of people who work at John Keells have made it their lifetime career, including me. But I think this ability to give back and to be part of something much larger than yourself is a great part of why we stay.
I can see the passion in terms of the personality, and I have seen the passion of also, you're talking about the BPOs, rural BPOs. So Jahan, who heads Informate, and I have done presentations about this globally. And he does the whole corporate presentation. Nobody's interested. And he talks about the rural BPOs. Everybody's suddenly very interested. So I think you can see where the passion, even in investors or potential clients, lie. Carmeline, what gets measured gets done. And obviously, your conglomerate, whatever you do, has to be measured and seen against goals. Very, very briefly, how do you assess? How does the foundation assesses its impact and success of its program?
We do it in various ways, Imran. For instance, if it's educational, we will have a pre-test, a post-test examinations. For English, we have English days. When it comes to awareness raising programs like under Project WAVE or substance abuse awareness, we will have feedback that is obtained pre and post from the participants. When it comes to women entrepreneurship, a lot of the impact comes not just in quantitative terms, how much more they are making now in terms of income, but I would say even more qualitatively, how much their lifestyles, their aspirations, what they bring into their families have been enhanced. All of these are measured. It's not easy, especially the qualitative. I think a lot of the time, a lot of the organizations that are into social development struggle when it comes to how does one measure qualitative impact. It takes time, it takes creativity, it takes innovation, it takes energy. We are a small team, so we are very aware of our limitations. So like Nadija said, sometimes we undertake third-party impact assessments for our bigger projects, for instance, English or our John Keells Prajashakti programs. We also talk constantly, again to reinforce what Nadija said, to our beneficiaries. Ultimately, they are our voice. They are the ones we listen to on how well our programs are going or not, how much of impact they are having or not, how much they can be improved. So I'll give you a quick example. We had this lady called Surekha from this border village in Halmilava in Anuradhapura district. She lost her husband in the conflict. She was widowed at 34 with 2 young children and 2 elderly parents to look after. She came to some of our programs that we were conducting at the time on entrepreneurial development through Women's Society, sat at the back, spoke not a word, and she later told us she was absolutely pessimistic about life. She had no hope, no motivation. She didn't know how to make themselves live that particular day, let alone in the future. Through our programs, she learned that she had a lot of entrepreneurial ability. She got into sewing, fabric painting, rug making, embroidery, mushroom cultivation. Everything that we conducted there, she imbibed, went home, practiced, and then went on to make of herself an entrepreneur par excellence. Today, she stands on her own 2 feet. Both her children have done their higher education. They are into employment. She still manages her own expenses, and she always turns back and says, you not only gave me hope, but you gave me a life, a livelihood I can be passionate about. My confidence is up. My children are on their feet. So that's the kind of empowerment that truly enriches us, motivates us, and makes us really understand that what we are doing is having ripple effect. So it is not just the beneficiaries. You can count and say 20 women in a village have been empowered through livelihoods. No. What about their children? What about their dependents? What about the wider community where they play a leadership role, for instance? So this cascading effect is ultimately how we measure impact.
Inspirational. The final question is to Krishan. JKH has done, say, 150 years, foundation, obviously. The formalized way is 20. What is your vision for the foundation itself? And do you think that the social impact of the foundation's work will be as influential as JKH's impact on the national economy?
Yeah, most certainly. I think if you look at the last few years, we've made some very large flagship investments, the Cinnamon Life project, City of Dreams, Sri Lanka, which is the largest private investment ever in the country, the West Terminal project, and a number of other investments. So with that, the impact of the group on the economy will only grow. And as you know, we contribute a part of our profits to the foundation. So with that, the scope of the foundation and the reach of the foundation will grow. But I think one thing that will drive this impact even more going forward is that it has become very much part of our group's DNA. So Nadija spoke so much about the volunteerism. And one example she missed out was Kalapola this year. The team had an online registration process. And within minutes of opening up that registration, we had more than what the number of people we needed. Just the people who were just waiting to register. And Kalapola is not easy. It's not 2 hours of work. You're there from very early in the morning till very late in the night in the heat and the sun. So the fact that so many people wanted to, so it's part of our DNA. So I can say our impact on the economy will grow, the scope of the foundation will grow. Really the best is yet to come.
Okay. On that optimistic note, Krishan, Nadija and Carmeline, thank you for your time. And here is best wishes from us for next, not just 20 years, the next 150 years of John Keells Foundation.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Imran.
Imran.
Thank you.